He set sail at the end of an era and carried aboard the power to start another. May 1945. As Berlin burned and the Third Reich crumbled, a German submarine left the port of Kiel in silence. Its name, U-234. The mission, to cross the Atlantic and the Indian Ocean to deliver to Japan a cargo so secret that not even part of the crew knew what was in the holds. The official destination was Tokyo. The real destination was the future of war. Inside that submarine were scientists, Messerschmitt jet parts, and a shipment of uranium oxide, material capable of changing the course of history, if it had reached its destination. Stay with me until the end and see how a single submarine could have given Japan the atomic bomb before the United States, and how the ocean, once again, decided the future of humanity. The U-234 was a rare beast among the steel monsters of the Kriegsmarine, a Type IXC Colossus modified for long-range strategic transport. Its 90-meter hull could cross entire oceans without refueling. But what made it different wasn't the engineering, it was the secret. On March 15, 1945, the submarine received direct orders from High Command. Depart for Japan carrying a cargo of maximum scientific importance. On the list, 560 kilograms of uranium oxide, V-2 missile components, experimental radars, and two prominent passengers, Hideo Tomonaga and Shoji Genzo, Japanese naval engineers specialized in military aviation. The commander, Johann Heinrich Fehler, received the mission with a mix of pride and despair. He knew the Reich was collapsing, but believed Japan could still resist. "If we make it, we might save the Axis," he told an officer before departure. It was a tragic illusion. When the submarine submerged and moved away from the coast, Germany was already on its knees. What the submarine carried, uranium, jet parts, and engineers, was the last breath of a dying empire trying to transfer its science to the ally that still fought. For weeks, the U-234 sailed in silence through the Atlantic, avoiding American patrol routes. The crew slept to the constant sound of electric motors and the fear of enemy radar. Every metallic noise, every sonar echo could be the end. But the greatest danger didn't come from the depths, it came from time. On May 8th, while the submarine was still en route, the radio intercepted an encrypted transmission. Germany had surrendered. Berlin had fallen. The Führer was dead. The naval command dissolved. Inside the submarine, the silence was absolute. Fehler gathered the officers in the control room. The dilemma was cruel. Continuing the mission would betray the surrender, but returning meant capture. Some officers wanted to head to Japan and deliver the ship to Japanese allies. Others, including the Japanese engineer Tomonaga, urged them to proceed at any cost. But Fehler knew the Atlantic was now under total Allied control. Taking the submarine to Japan would be a suicidal journey. The commander made a decision that would change the course for everyone aboard. "Surrender," he said. The words fell heavy as lead. Two of the Japanese officers, refusing to live to see defeat, took their own lives with cyanide pills. Their bodies were buried at sea, and the U-234 surfaced with an improvised white flag. It transmitted a coded message: German submarine surrendering to the Allies. Days later, on May 14, 1945, the USS Sutton, an American destroyer, intercepted the submarine off the coast of Newfoundland. When the American sailors boarded, they had no idea what they were about to find. In the dim corridors, surrounded by Japanese maps and sealed crates, they discovered cargo the world was not yet ready to understand. Inside those lead and zinc packages was something more valuable than any weapon: the material needed to build an atomic bomb. And what the United States did with it would change Japan's fate forever. In the metallic dimness of the captured submarine, American sailors moved among sealed crates, unknown instruments, and papers written in German and Japanese.
The U-234, which had surrendered peacefully to the destroyer USS Sutton, now revealed its true cargo, and it looked like nothing the Allies had seen before. Aboard were 5 tons of technical material, but a set of crates drew immediate attention. Each bore the inscription U-235, the chemical code for enriched uranium isotope. What seemed like just another war delivery became the most sensitive find of the entire conflict. Inside the surrendered submarine was what the engineers would call the beginning of a bomb. The Americans opened the compartments under direct orders from Washington. The inventory was straight out of science fiction. Radars, bombing optical systems, disassembled Messerschmitt Me-262 jet engines, silver ammunition, and the most dangerous, 560 kilograms of uranium oxide packed in lead cylinders. Beside the material were the personal belongings of the Japanese engineers Hideo Tomonaga and Shoji Genzo, who had died by suicide before capture. Documents found with them mentioned the cargo's final destination, the Japanese naval base at Sasebo, where Imperial scientists were secretly working on an atomic project, known only by internal code names. The American crew didn't grasp the immediate significance of what they'd found, but in Washington, the echo was instantaneous. The material was sent under armed escort to the Oak Ridge National Laboratory in Tennessee, the same one feeding the Manhattan Project, the program that would give the United States its own atomic bomb. The uranium from the German submarine was never officially tracked, but partial records indicate that some of it may have been incorporated into the enrichment cycle that culminated in the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki months later. Cruel irony, the material meant to arm Japan may have helped destroy it. The officers who interrogated Commander Johann Heinrich Fehler noticed something unusual. He didn't seem surrendered, but exhausted. Fehler explained that he had been instructed personally by Admiral Karl Donitz to deliver the cargo only to Japanese forces, and that he had received word of Germany's surrender too late to return. "I chose to live to tell the truth," he said. His crew's silence, however, was almost religious. None mentioned the uranium. None admitted knowing its value. In the days that followed, the U-234 was towed to Portsmouth, Virginia, where it became a floating laboratory. American scientists analyzed every bolt, every instrument. They discovered that Germany had already mastered uranium compression and isolation techniques more advanced than imagined. Japan, meanwhile, maintained small experimental reactors in occupied Korean territory. If the U-234 had arrived, it's possible the Empire of the Rising Sun would have attempted to produce its own bomb. Perhaps not in time to change the war's outcome, but enough to rewrite history. For the United States, the discovery was a stroke of luck and a symbolic victory. The captured uranium reinforced confidence that the Manhattan Project was ahead in the nuclear race. For the men of the U-234, it was the beginning of a long shadow. They became valuable prisoners, interrogated for months, then quietly released, each with the recommendation never to speak of it again. None of them did. The news was only publicly disclosed in 1947, and even then with omissions. The official version said the submarine carried unspecified technical materials. The rest was buried under military secrecy. But for those who saw inside that vessel, there was no doubt the U-234 carried the embryo of a weapon that could have changed the world. Today, historians and scientists still debate whether the uranium from that submarine was truly used in the bombs that ended the war. No document confirms it, none denies it. The truth, like the sea, seems to change color with the light. And for the men aboard, what weighed heaviest wasn't what they carried, it was what the world did with it. The submarine that left with the dream of saving the Axis ended its fate carrying the raw material of the apocalypse. And the fate of the U-234 was far from over.
In the heart of Tennessee, surrounded by mountains and electric fences, there was a city that didn't exist on maps: Oak Ridge. Created in secret by the United States government, it housed the laboratory where humanity would learn to split the atom. It was there that the uranium from the U-234 was taken in a military convoy guarded by armed soldiers who didn't even know what they were escorting. In confidential documents, the material was logged as samples captured from enemy transport. No one outside the Manhattan Project circles knew what was really inside those metal cylinders, the fuel for history's most destructive weapon. If you've made it this far and want to discover what the Americans really did with the captured uranium from the U-234, subscribe now, because what comes next shows how the war was decided before it even ended. At the Oak Ridge Laboratory, engineers and physicists quickly identified the unusual purity of the material. The uranium oxide transported by the Germans was of exceptional grade, far more refined than anything Japan could produce alone. An internal report dated June 1945 mentioned that the recovered samples contain compositions suitable for immediate conversion to metallic uranium. That simple, technical phrase is one of the most controversial in modern history. If true, it would indicate that the U-234 uranium was added to the stockpile that fueled the Manhattan Project in the weeks before the Trinity test and the bombs dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The American scientists never officially confirmed this connection, but the temporal coincidence is impossible to ignore. The submarine was captured on May 14. The uranium arrived at Oak Ridge at the end of May, and on July 16, 1945, less than 2 months later, the world's first nuclear explosion lit up the New Mexico desert. The silence of subsequent reports is almost as eloquent as a confession. No line mentions the exact fate of the captured samples. They simply vanish from the spreadsheets. Some say the material was only studied. Others believe part of it entered symbolically, or really, into the Little Boy and Fat Man bombs. The irony is brutal. If true, the uranium meant to ensure Japanese victory ended up used against Japan. A tragic twist that fate itself would seem incapable of writing. But in Oak Ridge, the scientists weren't thinking of ironies. They were thinking of calculations, efficiency, and deadlines. General Leslie Groves, in charge of the Manhattan Project, reportedly told his officers, "Use everything useful. History will be written later." That phrase echoes like an epitaph, because indeed, history was written, but the footnotes remained classified. The U-234 crew, held in Virginia prisoner camps, had no idea their cargo now slept under the American flag. They believed the submarine would be destroyed, and with it, the secrets they had sworn to protect. But U.S. naval intelligence saw further. The uranium wasn't just scientific curiosity, it was a strategic advantage, and in a war still raging against Japan, any advantage was invaluable. Meanwhile, on the Pacific Islands, the Japanese army still resisted. Tokyo was unaware that their last hope for balance, the uranium that had traveled months beneath the sea, was now in service of the enemy. Fate was already sealed, invisible, shaped by a captured submarine and a decision made in silence inside a mountain-surrounded laboratory. Decades later, when parts of the Oak Ridge files were declassified, historians found only traces, codes, cross-references, transport notes without recipients. The serial numbers of the U-234 containers reappear briefly in a 1945 log, and never again. It was as if the U.S. government itself had erased the trail between the submarine's capture and the deadly glow over Hiroshima. The uranium changed flags, and with it, the course of history. What began as a secret alliance between Germany and Japan ended as the catalyst for the end of both. But the story of the U-234 doesn't end in the laboratory. It would continue, dark and silent, on the seabed, because the submarine that carried the end of the world would never sail again.
The U-234 never saw the sun again. After its capture and the complete unloading of its cargo, the submarine became a shadow, a ghost the American government preferred to bury without fanfare. In August 1945, while the world looked to Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the German Colossus remained quietly anchored in Portsmouth, Virginia, under naval watch. Officers studied it in detail, dismantling systems, extracting data, photographing every inch of its structure. The Americans were surprised by the level of technical sophistication: double ballast valves, compact radars, and a ventilation system so advanced it allowed long, discrete submersions, a true precursor to modern submarine engineering. But after the tests and reports came the final order: sink the U-234. Like the other surrendered German submarines, it wouldn't be displayed or preserved. On November 20th, 1947, it was towed to the open sea, about 40 miles off the Maine coast, and deliberately sunk by cannon fire. No official record mentions a ceremony, a notice, or even a final photograph. The submarine that had carried one of the 20th century's most dangerous cargoes disappeared in the same silence with which it had sailed. In the archives, the reason is described coldly: disposal of captured enemy vessel, but some see in that act more than simple disposal. Certain historians believe the sinking of the U-234 was in fact an erasure operation, an attempt to eliminate physical evidence of the mission and the transported material. The hull, after all, could contain residual radiation traces, something that, if discovered by other countries, would reveal more than the American government was willing to admit. Commander Johann Heinrich Fehler, released in 1946, lived out his days in Hamburg. In rare interviews, he spoke little of the submarine, and when asked about the uranium, replied only, "I delivered what I was ordered to carry. The fate belonged to others." He died in 1993, taking details with him that were never recorded. Other crew members tried to write memoirs, but the manuscripts were blocked by military censorship. One of them, Wolfgang Hirschfeld, published excerpts from a diary in 1989, describing the moment the submarine surfaced for surrender. He wrote, "It felt like we were handing the future to whoever knew how to use it first." What the U-234 symbolizes is more than a military episode. It's the point where war changes face. The technological race, science in service of destruction, and the moral ambiguity of carrying a weapon one doesn't understand. The submarine was sunk, but what it carried continues, in a way, among us. And when the waves covered it for the last time, the silence of the Atlantic seemed to say, knowledge doesn't die. It just changes hands.
For years, the name U-234 vanished from records. No military manual mentioned it, no post-war report cited it, no line in official American commanders' memoirs acknowledged it. It was as if the submarine had never existed. But silence, as always, is the signature of secrecy. And the secret of the U-234 didn't die with the war. It was reborn in the heart of the Cold War. In archives declassified decades later, researchers began noticing gaps. Documents on the submarine's interception appeared truncated, with missing pages, scratched stamps, and incoherent dates. The name of the ship that captured it, the USS Sutton, appeared in logistics records, but the technical reports vanished. No document detailed the uranium transport, and the metal cylinders simply ceased to exist after shipment to Oak Ridge. A New York Herald Tribune reporter tried investigating the case in 1953 and received a response from the Department of Defense. Details of this operation remain confidential for national security reasons. It was a typical Cold War response: short, cold, and final. But what made the U-234 so dangerous to history? According to naval historian Robert C. Willard, the case was too embarrassing for all sides. Embarrassing for the United States, which possibly used enemy material without credit. Embarrassing for Germany, which had collaborated with Japan in the midst of the nuclear race. And embarrassing for Japan, which officially denied any atomic program, though documents found in Tokyo after surrender indicate otherwise. Behind the scenes of politics, the incident became a lesson. Knowledge was the new weapon. In 1946, as the United States and the Soviet Union began dividing the world into ideological blocs, the captured uranium became a symbol of what would define the century: the control of scientific information. The U-234 had shown that a single cargo could alter the fate of millions. From then on, nothing would be transparent. Among Manhattan Project officers, the episode became a ghost. An engineer who worked at Oak Ridge would recall years later, "We didn't talk about the origin of certain samples. We just worked on them."
That phrase, vague but revealing, confirms the pact of silence. Once mastered, knowledge became a reason for censorship. What was scientific conquest turned into political taboo. In the following decades, fragments of the story began emerging in unlikely places: naval transport lists, expense reports, photos archived in military magazines. One image in particular, discovered in 1982, showed American officers opening a hatch marked with the code C-14, the U-234's cargo compartment. Behind them, long cylinders with chemical inscriptions. The caption said only, "Captured enemy cargo, May 1945. It was a visual confession hidden in plain sight. The submarine that disappeared became a metaphor for what the century wanted to hide, the exact point where science and power blend until they lose form. The same material that could have fueled the Japanese imperial dream now sustained American nuclear paranoia. Knowledge had crossed the ocean, changing language, flag, and morality. And while official history maintained silence, writers and filmmakers began speculating. Novels, theories, documentaries emerged, all orbiting the same enigma. What exactly was inside the U-234 and where did it go? Some said the uranium was only used for purity tests, others that it was the final ingredient in the Hiroshima bomb. The truth never surfaced, but the doubt was enough. Because in the theater of the Cold War, doubt was more powerful than any fact. The few surviving crew members, interviewed in old age, continued to deny or avert their gaze. One, when questioned, replied only, "We carried the future. We just didn't know which direction." Thus, the U-234 became the perfect symbol of the 20th century, a story of forbidden knowledge, calculated silence, and truths that sleep on the seabed. But even the deepest secrets eventually float. And in 1985, a forgotten document in a Washington archive would surface, with a red stamp, "Recovered uranium shipment, source classified." It was the final clue that the ocean wasn't the only one hiding secrets. And if that paper was authentic, then the glow over Hiroshima began inside a German submarine.
The U-234 now rests in the depths of the Atlantic, but its echo still vibrates on the surface of history. It is more than a forgotten piece of iron. It is a mirror. In it, we reflect the moment humanity crossed the boundary of what it could control. That submarine didn't carry just uranium, engineers and technology. It carried the weight of the future, the prelude to an era in which knowledge would become more lethal than any army. When it was captured in May 1945, the war seemed about to end, but unnoticed, another war began. One fought not with fleets, but with ideas, formulas, and secrets. The oceans, silent and relentless, kept the submarine's body, but couldn't hide what it symbolizes. The U-234 represents the turning point between physical destruction and abstract threat, the transformation of war into science. Its hull, now covered in algae and coral, is a time capsule of everything the 20th century desired and feared. Within it lies the memory of men who believed they served a purpose, without understanding they were serving the birth of something much greater, the absolute power of the atom. The uranium that crossed the Atlantic aboard that vessel may have been used to destroy cities, or it may have been stored, studied, dissolved in silence. The fact is that the material meant to ensure an empire's survival ended up sealing another's fate. The same element that traveled in secret beneath the waves resurfaced as light, fire, and ashes over Hiroshima. There are ironies even the ocean can't erase. The story of the U-234 isn't just about what happened, it's about what could have happened. And that may be its greatest power. If it had reached Japan, perhaps the war's course would have been different. Perhaps the world would have known atomic power in different hands, with unimaginable consequences.
The submarine never fired a torpedo, but its solitary voyage shifted history's balance more than any battle. The scientists, officers, and sailors linked to this episode lived the rest of their lives surrounded by silence. Some kept quiet out of duty, others out of guilt. Commander Feeler himself said that when he thought of the U-234, he heard the sea as a murmur of voices that shouldn't be heard anymore. It was the invisible weight of knowledge, a burden that doesn't end with war, but spans generations. Today, divers seek its wreckage and historians reconstruct its route, but the true treasure of the U-234 isn't in the metal, it's in the lesson it left. The danger isn't just in the weapons we create, but in what we decide to hide. The secret can be more destructive than the bomb. Silence can last longer than the explosion's echo. The ocean is now its tomb and its memorial. And as currents sweep the sleeping hull, the world continues living under the shadow of the legacy it carried. The U-234 left carrying the end of the war and brought, unknowingly, the beginning of fear. If this story made you reflect on the power and price of knowledge, subscribe now, because the past still speaks, even when it tries to drown itself. And remember, some secrets, like the uranium of the U-234, never disappeared completely, they just changed depth.